Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, the Executive Director of the American Constitutional Rights Union and the ACRU Action Fund. And thank you for joining us for another one of our episodes on Live Free TV. When you think about living free, well, it should be as Joshua once said, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. I mean, you should be able within your house to be able to raise your children. It says in Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way that you should go, and they will not depart from that. But when you hear from this current administration, from the president, the vice president, from the first lady, from the White House spokesperson, that your children are not your own, that's a big challenge to us being able to live free if we cannot even make decisions about our own children. And so we're going to talk about this issue about what is critical decision about our own children is their gender. Who would have ever thought that we'd be having this conversation in America? We'll be joined with Brandon M. Showalter. He is a journalist and podcaster with the Christian Post who has reported extensively on topics of theological interest in the church, bioethics issues such as euthanasia, assisted suicide, artificial reproductive technology and surrogacy, and the developments of the gender identity movement and transgender ideology. Brandon Showalter is a journalist for the Christian Post and the host of the Christian Post podcast, Generation Indoctrination. He earned his Bachelor's of Arts degree in International Studies in Spanish from Bridgewater College of Virginia, is a fellow of the John Jay Institute of Faith, Society, and Law, a graduate of a 3-year program at Bethel School of Ministry in Redding, California, and has a master's degree in human rights from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us here at Live Free TV.
Thank you, Alan. It's good to be with you today.
When we listen and we hear about this gender dysphoria and this gender indoctrination, I was very concerned about what we just saw happen in Ohio with issue 1, where basically they have said that it's a constitutional right now for people to be able to say they can murder an unborn child in the womb, but even more so, parents don't have to be notified. And that also, if I'm correct, extends over to the mutilation of the bodies or changing their quote unquote gender. How can we correct this and this assault that we see happening down at the state level?
Well, it is the insidious wording of issue 1 in Ohio was very troubling to me as a journalist who has been covering the gender issues for some time now. In terms of combating it at the state level, I'm obviously not a legislator, and I'm not here to give any kind of legislative advice or endorse any candidates, obviously. But I think that what's going to be necessary is for increased public awareness of just what goes on in these gender procedures. The medicalization of gender, particularly at the pediatric level, is very troubling to many people, not just Republicans and conservatives, but I hear from a wide swath of people, Democrats, atheists, non-religious people, secular Jews. I mean, it is very troubling when you think of just what's involved with putting children on chemical puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones, which forecloses their fertility, sterilizes them, and then these body-altering surgeries. So to see that packaged together with a lot of other issues, and when that is troubling in and of itself, it's just shocking. 2023 has been a very important year in my estimation because of how much resistance we have seen across the culture to these issues. There has been a state level push throughout 17 states where they've enacted some kind of ban on this medicalization for minors. And you speak of Ohio, they are currently considering a restriction on gender medicalization for youth. And so the pushback is just going to have to continue however it can, because I think only now are we in the United States beginning to see some things change. Europe has been backpedaling from this treatment protocol, if you can even call it that. Sweden, Finland, France, the UK, they've all been making moves, backpedaling and saying this treatment protocol for gender confusion is not worth the paper it's printed on. It's just the evidence is very, very thin for drugging children with hormones and blockers, surgeries. It doesn't work. It's not effective. And so they've been taking those steps back. Here we have a deeper challenge in the United States, I think in part because of the medical industrial complex and their influence and the money that can be made there. Plus, this is just marketed to our youth through social media and in popular programming. And so there are many fronts on which I think people who are concerned about this are going to have to continue to push back and raise awareness. So we've got our work cut out for us, even though this has been a very good year on that end.
Well, you brought up a great point because, having served in the military, we always hear people talk about the defense industrial complex. But now we have this medical industrial complex that is really pushing this. And even part of the new business plan of Planned Parenthood is now this gender mutilation surgeries and, puberty blockers, hormonal therapies. Is there some type of medical ethics that these people are breaching?
You would think so, but medical ethics, I have sometimes said, has gone the way of the dodo bird. It's basically extinct. It's collapsed. And the question that I receive often from parents who reach out to me and from others is, whatever happened to first do no harm? Don't doctors take a Hippocratic oath? Where has biomedical ethics gone? And I think where it has gone has been with these fundamental shifts that have taken place within the medical industry over time, where doctors and nurse practitioners and professionals that you go see and you trust with your health, they had a kind of sense of duty that they were going to really look out for your health, whereas it's become so consumeristic that people have gone and done their searches online. They want a particular drug for a particular condition, and doctors feel kind of obligated to just go along with whatever the patient wants. And regardless of what they may need, or sort of looking under the hood, you might say, for, in the case of gender confusion, underlying mental health issues and psychiatric comorbidities. There's not this holistic approach that used to be taken. Some people say that, well, medicine used to be more paternalistic and it was sort of bad in other ways, and that may well be true. But the hyper-consumerism that has affected the health industry is, I think, very troubling, because if you're going to trust someone with your health, and the doctor in a white coat and a diploma on the wall, they carry great social trust. They should be looking out for you as a whole person and consider the many factors that might be ailing you, and not just signing off on, again, in the case of gender confusion, an experimental treatment protocol that has very, very thin evidence for effectiveness. You certainly don't cut the body to heal the mind.
Yeah.
To give a cross-sex hormone which can radically alter your endocrine system. Gender confusion is not an endocrine condition, Alan. It's a psychological ailment, and you should first address it like that. So it is very troubling to see medical ethics collapse the way it has, and especially when I see the surgeries, which are just so gruesome. Like, under what standard of medical ethics does it make sense, or is it justifiable to remove a physically healthy organ? I mean, that was the key gripe, if I understand the history correctly, of Paul McHugh, the psychiatrist at Johns Hopkins, who, they've got trans clinics there now, but he was actually instrumental in shutting down the transgender operations several decades ago, because there's no way to tell, if you remove an organ, whether that person who's gender dysphoric is actually going to be helped by it. And because you don't know, you err on the side of caution. Well, I still think that's a good standard. And the surgeries are just so unbelievably gruesome too. There are clinics in this country where they perform non-binary gender nullification surgeries, and you don't even want to hear about what goes on in those spaces. It's absolutely ghoulish. It's truly Frankenstein stuff.
When I think about what you're describing, and in most places in the United States of America, and I have not seen any that are not in conjunction with this, you cannot go out and get a tattoo if you're under the age of 18. But now we're saying that, kids can make a decision that they want, as you just described, healthy body parts removed because of a mental condition, a psychological condition. And yet we have some states in the United States of America that's saying that if the adults in the home to whom that child belongs, if they don't affirm that, I love how they use that language, if they don't affirm that, they will remove the child away from the parents. And again, to me, that seems like a complete violation of parental rights and constitutional rights even.
It is ruthless. The fierce just force that this ideology has gripped our lawmaking bodies, the legal structures, the Department of Social Services, every institution that has power in this country about how you raise your children, hospitals, medical care systems. It's unbelievable how quickly they have captured the levers of power within these entities. And yes, children have been removed from their parents' custody. I know of cases where a child has wound up dead on the train tracks because she committed suicide after having been placed in a group home. She was drugged with the hormones, and her poor mother had to get the phone call from, I believe it was the coroner or the authorities, saying that they were retrieving the pieces of her daughter's shattered body from the railroad. And that was a transgender situation. And it is unbelievable how much parental rights has eroded, again, in service to this insane dogma that human beings can change sex. They'll call it gender and they'll dress it up with all of this, postmodern lingo, but it's ruthless, it's totalitarian. And I hear from all kinds of parents whose politics are as broad as the day is long.
Yeah.
And they're absolutely distraught because of how betrayed they feel by the institutions that should have been looking out for their kids, but are instead undermining and marginalizing parents who are the best defenders of their children and who should be deferred to first.
You're absolutely right. And so with that being said, let's talk about the documentary that you did called Dead Name. And what made you want to create this documentary, and talk to us about the problems that you have had, because you were deplatformed. That documentary was deplatformed. So tell us about Dead Name.
Well, I actually didn't create the documentary, but I've been kind of the public face of it. Taylor Reese is the filmmaker. She did a fantastic job humanizing this issue from the parents' standpoint. She wanted to give a voice to several parents, and so it profiles 3 of them who had their lives completely upended and disrupted. And these are 3 parents whose families have been, I often say, irretrievably fractured by this ideology. The institutions, like I was just saying, have fundamentally gone against them in the worst possible ways, and it's an absolutely nightmarish descent into a world that they never knew existed. And you're correct that Vimeo, almost a year ago, in late January, they took that film off their platform with no warning. Now, remarkably, Taylor and her team were able to rehome the film on a platform of its own, and people can still go see it at deadnamedocumentary.com. But I was a part of that film because I have interacted with countless moms and dads who are at the end of their rope. And so she had me as part of that film to speak about what I had learned and what I had seen on the front lines of this issue for years. I really want to urge everybody to go see it. Again, they can go to deadnamedocumentary.com and familiarize yourself with the excruciating anguish of these moms and dads who love their children more than their own lives, and they will do anything they can to save their kids from irreversible medical harm. Because that's what this is. This is one of the worst medical scandals, I think, that the world has ever seen, and it's particularly pernicious because it is marketed to our youth in identity nomenclature. I don't think I've ever seen a medical scandal, you think of thalidomide or opioids or lobotomies, where that sort of sense of identity was wrapped up in it. But children are led to believe today, children and young people, that they have to participate in this experimental medicalization, this medical scandal, and that it's a part of who they are. That's what's so insidious and awful about it. That when parents try to fight back, it's like they're going against how their kids conceive of their very selves. It's so pernicious. But the truth has a way of getting out there. And thankfully, when Vimeo did deplatform the film, it kind of created a Streisand effect. And when you censor something, everyone wants to see it. So it's actually worked out really well. And that film continues to get traction. People are still very moved by it. It's very poignant. It's very quiet and intimate. And again, it really humanizes the issue. So deadnamedocumentary.com, people can still go see it. And I very much urge them to.
Who would have ever thought that we'd be talking about censorship in the United States of America, not allowing people to get out an opposing thought, perspective, or insight on an issue as important as this, that how it affects our children.
And so they called it hate speech. They had the temerity to call it, and it's, as Taylor has said, the film director Taylor Reese, it's love speech. These parents love their children, and they just want to share their stories of what it was like. And so Vimeo lost. They tried and failed to snuff this film out, but we're still very much glad that it's been able to get out there despite the attempts to scrub it from its platform.
It's interesting because I know in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20, it says, "Woe be to those who will call good evil, evil good, that would exchange light for darkness and darkness for light, and will call sweet bitter and bitter sweet." All of a sudden, loving your child and want to see the best for your child, being it this issue of gender dysphoria or the issue of educating your child and not indoctrinating your child, now all of a sudden that's considered the hate speech. But those who want to destroy the lives and the bodies of our children, that's something different. It's an upside down, bizarre world, and so I just got to ask you, Brandon, because we're sitting here, and I'm sure people are going to be watching our interview, and they're scratching their heads and say, "When did this all get started? When all of a sudden did this thing pop into our everyday lives of a male swimmer who was 463rd in his swim category? Now all of a sudden decides he's a female and he's number one in female swimming. When did this all get started? Because I can't remember what 10 years ago
Yeah.
this being an issue of us telling young children or marketing to young children or sexualizing young children. What is it about the progressive socialist left, their ideology, their agenda, that has brought this to the forefront?
Well, we could probably talk for hours about that, Alan, because it seems so sudden, but it's actually been brewing and gestating in our institutions for many years and decades,
Hmm.
really. One of the scholars that I've worked with every so often on these issues, and we correspond semi-frequently, compares it to a phase change. Everybody thinks it's happened so quickly, but really, when liquid water turns to ice, and then all of a sudden everybody realizes, oh, the form of it has changed. And so the institutional capture, the ideological capture, those are phrases that I use a lot. There have been gender ideologues with the pseudoscience and in the humanities departments within our universities, LGBTQ activists, those types who have been very active in changing culture over the years, have had a concerted effort for a long time to further their dogma in cultural high space. And so it's kind of like a phase change, like from
Hmm.
liquid water to ice. Everybody suddenly realizes now because of how explosive it is. And I think there have been several flashpoints that sort of marked a turn. But this has been brewing for a while. You see the encroachments of this ideology, especially in education, where activist groups are very influential at putting these kinds of gender beliefs in anti-bullying lessons, and so parents can't opt out of it with sex ed, and so then you change the generations how they think in the
Hmm.
school system. The mainstreaming of the medical aspects they've turned the heat up very slowly, where the first gender clinic, a pediatric gender clinic in this country, opened in 2007 in Boston. Europe had been doing it for some time, and they had sort of migrated over here, and they've slowly normalized these procedures over the years to the point where then there was a big change between 2016 and 2017. According to the American Society for Plastic Surgeons, the number of gender surgeries that were carried out on females quadrupled. So you saw this skyrocketing rate of the normalization of surgery to remove physically healthy organs. But it had been the public had been sort of, I hate to use the word groomed, but they had been
Hmm.
ideologically, enticed down this road that this was actually just a normal part of being LGBTQ, and that anybody who dares scrutinize it or raise questions about medical ethics was just a hateful, evil right-wing bigot. And so they use the same sort of script, despite the fact, again, that I hear, Alan, from a wide spectrum of people, including very left-wing, atheist, non-religious people who do not agree with this at all and are adamantly opposed. I know radical feminists and lesbians and secular types who are absolutely aghast that they would do this to a child's body,
Yeah.
or to a troubled young adult. Like, there are a lot of people who want medical ethics to matter again.
Yeah. So as we get ready to wrap this up, what's the end game from either side? What is the end game from the side that is pushing this, and what must be the end game for those of us who are trying to stop this and protect our children?
Well, there are many people who have different theories about that. Some people think that the end game is transhumanism, and they say that, and that sounds just so far out there. One of the major figures in this space is Martine Rothblatt, who is himself trans woman, so to speak. He was on the cover of New York Magazine back in 2014. He's actually got a transhumanist cult called Terrasem. And so this body modification, there's all these weird beliefs where, and he's spoken about how he thinks transgenderism is the on-ramp to transhumanism, and that these next things where you're sort of merging technology with human beings, that seems to be where some people think this is going, and indeed there are signs in that direction. Whatever the end game is, this is what I'll say. This is, to me, as a Christian, I see this as an assault on the image of God, on the human body, because the scripture declares that we're made male and female in God's image. And so from a spiritual vantage point, I see this as a brazen assault on who we are as male and female. That can't be denied. I'm not even sure if the gender ideologues know entirely where they are going, because it's just so insane. And they're just going to wreak as much havoc and destruction as they can. It seems that the cruelty and the confusion are the point, because none of this makes any reasonable, rational sense. I'm not sure they have an end game, but I think what's happening, spiritually speaking, is that this is a destruction against humanity. This is an anti-human blight on society. There's nothing good at all about this movement that tries to separate our bodies from who we really are. That's just what the pernicious aspect about this is, that this is an attack on the human body. And because it's an attack on the human body, I believe, again, that this is an attack on the image of God. Our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. They matter to God. And so, of course, they're going to be, ruthlessly assaulted. And we as Christians and people who care about constitutional rights and parental rights and all of the freedoms that we have enjoyed in this country, delineated in our Constitution, need to really get grounded in some wholesome and healthy and rational anthropology. That we need to understand, have a robust understanding of what it means to be a human person and how our rights flow from that. Because if we miss that, we've missed the whole ballgame. The end game is chaos and destruction. Wherever and however it permutates and moves, the gender ideologues are destroying everything in their wake. There isn't a single area of our culture where they don't bring absolutely ruinous destruction and corruption. It turns everything it touches to ash. So anybody, whatever your politics, if you're listening to this today, whether you're on the right or the left or in the middle, or whether you're religious or not, resist this with as much enthusiasm and gusto as you can possibly muster, because it's completely destructive.
Yeah, I have to firmly agree. And I would say that I've always seen this as an opportunity for these gender ideologues, as you call them, to undermine the omnipotence of God, to say that he is not that omnipotent. He is not omniscient. He really can't, make you male or female, that you have the opportunity to decide what you want to be. And therefore man will assist you in doing that. And so I think this is an opportunity to supplant, God. And therefore, when you look at our Declaration of Independence and we talk about our inalienable rights being granted by a creator, our life, our liberty, our pursuit of happiness, I think they're just trying to scratch out the creator and just say that man is the one that's control of your life, your liberty, your pursuit of happiness. And we're the ones that can make a decision. And we're more enlightened than you are, Brandon. I mean, you just don't get it. We need to free your mind so that you can go out there and, be whatever you want to be and stop being constrained within your quote unquote assigned gender at birth. And I will tell you, having just become a grandfather for the second time, I think it's just a bunch of hogwash, and we've got to get back to the basics. Brandon, where can everyone follow you and learn more about Dead Name and all the work that you're doing at the Christian Post?
Well, they can go to christianpost.com, and I'll say, it's just in keeping with what you just said, Alan. Our executive editor has basically said what you just articulated, exactly that this ideology is the pinnacle. It's the epitome of self-idolatry. It's the ultimate attempt to become your own God. And so I couldn't agree more with what you just said. And so you'll get that flavor of news reporting and commentary if you read Christian Post. So christianpost.com. They can also download a free ebook that I co-authored with Dr. Jeff Myers of Summit Ministries. It's called Exposing the Gender Lie: How to Protect Children and Teens from the Transgender Industry's False Ideology. And our season 3 of our podcast series, Generation Indoctrination, is going to be released here in a couple of weeks. End of December and early January, we'll have several new episodes where we sort of take a look at what happened in 2023 and examine the issues in more depth. And as you mentioned, deadnamedocumentary.com, that will underline what's at stake with regard to this issue, I think, better than anything else, because it shows what it's really like for families. I believe as we continue to see the fallout from detransitioners and all those young people who are coming forward and testifying about how these drugs and surgeries wrecked their bodies and their lives, the next phase of the fallout, and we're starting to see it already, is going to be how families were fractured and splintered and upended. And that pain, I think, is sometimes even worse than the bodily suffering of the detransitioners, because the way relationships were ruptured, it's just brutal. And so many families were ripped to shreds by this, and there needs to be a reckoning over those issues. So go to deadnamedocumentary.com and give that a watch, and you'll get a taste of what this is really like for moms and dads.
And I know you get out and do some traveling and speak on this issue. Going into 2024, are there any dates and locations that you can share with the audience right now?
There are some dates, but they are still tentative, so I can't say where I will be just yet, but things are developing, and I am available to speak increasingly, so I'm happy to come and talk about what's at stake. We just need more awareness. People need to realize that some of the things that I've described on during this interview are pretty gruesome and hard to hear, but it's as bad as I'm saying, and let your imagination run, and you're probably got a good grip on what's going on. I mean, we're the thousands of young people and children that have been sterilized and carved up in pursuit of a lie that it's actually possible for them to be the other gender, the other sex. It's it needs to go in the history books. I think some doctoral thesis. Somebody needs to do a doctoral thesis about how this was allowed to take off in our society because of the insanity that was allowed to gestate and fester within our institutions, and then be presented to young people as the pathway to liberation. This is a very ugly chapter in our history, I must say, and it threatens parental rights and families. And that's just the thing. It would be bad enough, Alan, that this is just be a medical scandal and how horrible that is. But this ideology is totalitarian. It ruins everything it touches. It will destroy parental rights. It will destroy the Constitution. It already is. And so, again, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, if you're a person of goodwill, who just values having rationality function in our society, resist gender ideology with as much force as you possibly can, because this will destroy the fabric of our nation at the most foundational level.
You know, it is not just, as you said, the medical industrial complex, but it is also a media industrial complex.
They're the worst. Yeah,
that is pushing this. And like I said, it comes back to Vimeo, knocking you off and deplatforming you. So again, we have seen this with COVID, and we've seen this so many other things, is that when you go against this intentional, purposeful, ideological agenda of the progressive socialist left and their tentacles out there in our culture and society, they don't want that truth out there. So thank you so much, Brandon, for being out there and sharing this truth. Thank you for being with us here at Live Free TV. I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And to everyone, thank you so very much for tuning in to this episode of Live Free TV. And you know how to get in touch with Brandon, follow his work, because I think this is a critical issue, not for an election cycle, but for the survival of our children in this constitutional republic. God bless you all, and we'll see you next time.